Have you ever felt like you just don't measure up? Like no matter how hard you try, you're always the last one picked. The one everyone expects to fail? Maybe you know the sting of falling short, of watching others breeze through what you struggle with, of hearing the whispers behind your back, of feeling invisible in a crowd. Private Ben Carter knew that feeling better than anyone. From the first day of basic training, Ben was the odd man out. He was smart, brilliant, actually, with a knack for maps and radios, but his body just wouldn't cooperate. He lagged behind on every run, finished last in every obstacle course, and failed every single fitness test the Army threw at him. Push-ups? He barely managed half the required number. Pull-ups? Forget it. The rope climb? He never made it past halfway. The other recruits noticed. They gave him nicknames: dead weight, anchor, last place. Some were cruel, others just resigned. His drill sergeant, a mountain of a man named Sykes, seemed to take Ben's failures personally. "Carter, you're a liability." Sykes would bark, red-faced and exasperated. "You think the enemy's gonna wait while you catch your breath? You think your brains are gonna save you when you can't even carry your own pack?" Ben tried. He really did. He woke up early to run extra laps. He stayed late in the gym, hands blistered from the pull-up bar. He read every manual, memorized every procedure, hoping that maybe, just maybe, knowledge could make up for what his muscles lacked. But every test day was the same. Man at the back of the pack, gasping for air, his uniform soaked with sweat, his heart pounding with shame. He thought about quitting. More than once, he stood in front of the mirror in the barracks, staring at his reflection, wondering if he'd ever be good enough. But something inside him refused to give up. Maybe it was stubbornness. Maybe it was pride. Maybe it was the memory of his dad, a decorated veteran who'd always told him, "Courage isn't about being the strongest. It's about showing up. Even when you're scared, you'll fail." Still, the doubts gnawed at him. He saw them in the eyes of his squad mates, especially Corporal Davis, the golden boy of the unit, who seemed to glide through every challenge with effortless confidence. One night, after another failed fitness evaluation, Ben sat alone on the edge of his bunk, staring at his trembling hands. The barracks were quiet, the air heavy with the scent of sweat and boot polish. He heard laughter from the far end of the room. Davis and his friends, swapping stories about the day's drills. "He'll never make it," Davis said, not bothering to whisper. "He's just slowing us down." Ben clenched his fists, fighting the urge to shout back. Instead, he pulled out his notebook, a battered, dog-eared thing filled with sketches of the camp, notes on radio frequencies, and diagrams of rescue procedures. If he couldn't outrun them, he'd outthink them. The next morning, the battalion was called to a briefing. The commander, a stern woman named Captain Ramirez, outlined the mission: a routine patrol through the mountains, checking on a remote outpost that had gone silent. "Standard procedure," she said. "But stay sharp. The terrain's rough and comms are spotty." Ben listened closely, making mental notes. He'd studied the maps, knew the valleys and ridges better than anyone. He tried to offer a suggestion about a shortcut, but Davis cut him off with a smirk. "Let the real soldiers handle it, Carter." The patrol set out at dawn, boots crunching on gravel, rifles slung over shoulders. The mountain air was thin and cold, biting at exposed skin. Ben struggled to keep up, his pack feeling heavier with every step. Davis and the others moved ahead, laughing and joking, barely glancing back. Hours passed. The sun climbed higher, turning the valley into a furnace. Ben's legs burned, his lungs screamed, but he kept moving. He watched the others, how they navigated the rocks, how they checked their compasses, how they trusted each other. He wanted to belong. He wanted to prove he was more than the sum of his failures. By midday, the patrol reached the outpost, a cluster of sandbagged huts perched on a ridge. The place was eerily quiet. No sentries, no movement. Just the wind whispering through the trees. Captain Ramirez signaled for everyone to spread out and check the perimeter. Ben hung back, scanning the area with his binoculars. He noticed something odd, a set of fresh tracks leading away from the camp, down into a narrow ravine. He hesitated, then called out, "Ma'am, I think." But Davis cut him off again. "Stay with the gear, Carter. We'll handle this." Ben bit his tongue, frustration boiling inside him. He watched as the squad disappeared into the huts, leaving him alone with the packs and radios. Minutes ticked by. Then, suddenly, gunfire erupted from the far side of the camp. Shouts, chaos, the crackle of static on the radio. Ben's heart leapt into his throat. He grabbed the radio, trying to make contact, but all he got was static. He looked at the tracks again, then at the ravine. He could run for help or he could follow his instincts. Ben took a deep breath, shouldered his pack, and started down the ravine, every step a defiance of the doubts that had haunted him since day one. He didn't know it yet, but he was about to face the greatest test of his life and the chance to prove that sometimes the ones who fail the loudest are the ones who save the day. Ben Carter's boots slipped on loose gravel as he descended into the ravine, heart pounding in his chest. The world above was chaos, gunfire, shouts, and the distant echo of panic. But down here, the air was heavy and still, thick with the scent of earth and pine. Every step felt like a leap into the unknown. He crouched behind a boulder, listening. The radio on his belt hissed with static, punctuated by fragments of desperate voices. "Ambush, need backup, Davis is hit." Ben's hands shook as he adjusted the frequency, trying to reach anyone. Nothing but white noise. He remembered the tracks he'd seen, fresh, deliberate, leading deeper into the ravine. He followed them, moving carefully, every sense on high alert. The terrain was rough, rocks jutting from the earth like broken teeth, thorns tearing at his uniform. Sweat stung his eyes, but he pressed on. Ben's mind raced with every lesson he'd learned, not from the obstacle course, but from the manuals he'd studied late at night. He remembered diagrams of escape routes, notes on enemy tactics, the importance of staying low and moving quietly. He wasn't the fastest or the strongest, but he could outthink anyone if he had to. He rounded a bend and froze. Ahead, half hidden by brush, was a figure in camouflage, one of his squad mates, Private Lee, clutching his leg and grimacing in pain. Blood seeped through his fingers. "Lee," Ben whispered, rushing to his side. "What happened?" "Ambush," Lee gasped. "They came out of nowhere. Davis and Ramirez are pinned down. I tried to get clear, but..." He gestured to his wounded leg. Ben's training kicked in. He tore open his first aid kit, applied a tourniquet above the wound, and checked Lee's pulse. "You're going to be okay. Stay quiet." He scanned the ravine, mind racing. The squad was split, some pinned in the camp, others scattered. The enemy had the high ground, and Ben was alone, save for a wounded comrade and a radio that wouldn't connect. He weighed his options. He could try to carry Lee back up the ravine, but the enemy would spot them in seconds. He could stay put and hope for rescue, but time was running out. Ben remembered the shortcut he'd mapped out weeks ago, a narrow path that wound behind the ridge, leading to a vantage point above the outpost. If he could get there, he might be able to spot the enemy positions, relay coordinates, and call in support. He looked at Lee. "Can you move?" Lee gritted his teeth. "I'll try." Ben fashioned a makeshift crutch from a fallen branch, slung Lee's arm over his shoulder, and helped him to his feet. Together, they moved slowly, every step a test of willpower as they climbed. Ben's mind flashed with doubt. He could hear Davis's voice in his head. "You're a liability." He pushed the thought away, focusing on the path ahead. They reached the vantage point, breathless and battered. Ben scanned the valley below. He could see the enemy three figures moving between the huts, rifles at the ready. His squad was pinned behind a sandbag wall, outnumbered and outgunned. Ben pulled out his notebook, quickly sketching the layout. He calculated distances, angles, and lines of sight. He remembered a trick from a field manual using reflective surfaces to signal for help. He found a shard of broken mirror in his kit, angled it toward the sun, and flashed a signal toward the distant ridge where he hoped the battalion's support team might be watching. 3 short flashes, then 3 long, then 3 short again. So as he waited, heart pounding. Minutes ticked by. Then a flash of light answered from the ridge. Someone had seen him. Ben grabbed the radio, tried the emergency frequency. Static, then a faint voice. Identify. This is Private Carter, Bravo Platoon. We're pinned. Down at Outpost Sierra. Enemy positions marked. Request immediate support. The reply crackled through. Copy, Carter. Support inbound. Hold your position. Ben exhaled, relief flooding through him. He turned to Lee. Help is coming. But the enemy had spotted their movement. Gunfire erupted, bullets kicking up dirt around them. Ben dragged Lee behind a boulder, heart racing. He scanned the area, looking for anything they could use. He spotted a pile of rocks above the enemy's position, unstable, ready to fall. He remembered another lesson. Sometimes the environment is your best weapon. He crawled to the edge, careful not to expose himself, and began loosening the rocks. With a final shove, the pile tumbled down, crashing into the enemy's cover and scattering them. His squad seized the moment. Davis and Ramirez led a charge, pushing the enemy back. Ben fired his rifle, covering their advance. The support team arrived moments later, sweeping the area and securing the outpost. The firefight was over. Ben slumped to the ground, exhaustion washing over him. Lee gripped his shoulder. You saved us, Carter. Ben shook his head. We saved each other. As the medics arrived, tending to the wounded, Davis approached. For the first time, there was no trace of mockery in his eyes, only respect. I was wrong about you, Davis said quietly. You're the reason we're alive. Ben managed a tired smile. Just doing my job. But inside, he felt something new, a quiet pride, a sense of belonging. He had failed every fitness test. But when it mattered most, he'd led the rescue that saved the battalion. Ben Carter sat on the edge of the battered outpost wall, his hands still shaking, sweat cooling on his brow as dusk settled over the mountains. The air was heavy with the scent of gunpowder and pine, and the last rays of sunlight painted the ravine in gold and shadow. Around him, Bravo Platoon was a patchwork of exhaustion and relief, some tending wounds, some slumped against sandbags, others staring in stunned silence at the ground they'd just held. He could hardly believe it himself. The kid who'd failed every fitness test, who'd been written off as dead weight, had just led the rescue that saved them all. Medics worked by headlamp, patching up Lee's leg and Ramirez's grazed shoulder. Davis, his arm in a sling, limped over and sat beside Ben. For a long moment, neither spoke. The silence was thick with things unsaid. Finally, Davis broke it. You know, I always thought leadership was about being the toughest guy in the room. Turns out, it's about being the one who doesn't quit when everything goes to hell. Ben managed a tired smile. I just did what anyone would do. Davis shook his head. No, Carter. Most people freeze. Most people wait for orders. You saw what needed doing and did it. You got Lee out. You got us all out. Ben looked down at his hands, still stained with dirt and blood. I was terrified. Davis laughed, a rough, honest sound. We all were. The difference is, you moved anyway. They sat in silence, the weight of the day pressing down on them. Ben's mind replayed every moment. The gunfire, the scramble up the ravine, the flash of sunlight on the mirror, The relief in Lee's eyes when help arrived. He thought of his father's words, "Courage isn't about being the strongest," and realized, for the first time, what they truly meant. The next morning, Captain Ramirez called the platoon together. Her voice was hoarse but strong. "Yesterday, we were ambushed. We lost good people, but we didn't break. And we owe that to Private Carter." She turned to Ben, her eyes fierce. "You kept your head. You used your training. You saved lives. That's what this uniform is about." The squad broke into applause. Some clapped Ben on the back, others just nodded, but the respect in their eyes was unmistakable. Even Sykes, the hard-edged drill sergeant who'd never had a kind word for Ben, offered a rare nod. "Didn't think you had it in you, Carter. Glad to be wrong." Ben felt a lump in his throat. For so long, he'd measured himself by the standards he couldn't meet. The pull-ups, the sprints, the obstacle course. Now, for the first time, he saw himself through their eyes. Not as a failure, but as a soldier. That night, Ben sat by the fire, writing a letter to his father. He described the rescue, the fear, the relief, the moment he realized he could do more than survive, he could lead. He didn't mention the fitness tests, the shame, the doubts. Instead, he wrote about courage, about showing up, about not giving up when it mattered most. He closed the letter with a simple line. "I think I finally understand what you meant. Dad, thank you for believing in me, even when I didn't." He folded the paper carefully, tucking it into his pack. Around him, the camp was quiet. The only sounds the crackle of the fire and the distant call of a night bird dot in the days that followed. Word of Ben's action spread through the battalion. Commanders from other units stopped by to shake his hand. The chaplain asked him to speak to a group of new recruits about perseverance. Even the battalion commander, a stern woman known for her icy demeanor, called him into her office. "You did good, Carter," she said, her tone almost gentle. "We need more soldiers like you, ones who think, who adapt, who don't quit." Ben nodded, unsure what to say. For so long, he'd felt invisible. Now, he was being seen, not just for what he'd done, but for who he was. His squadmates began to treat him differently. They asked his opinion on patrol routes, trusted him to lead reconnaissance missions, relied on his knowledge of the terrain. He was still slower on the runs, still struggled with the rope climb, but now there was respect in every glance. He found himself mentoring others, the ones who lagged behind, who felt like outsiders. He shared his notebook, taught them the shortcuts. He'd mapped the tricks he'd learned. He told them what his father had told him. Courage isn't about being the strongest. It's about showing up, even when you're scared you'll fail. Weeks later, Bravo Platoon was assigned a high-risk mission, a nighttime evacuation through enemy territory. The plan was risky, the margin for error razor-thin. Captain Ramirez called Ben into her tent. "I want you to lead the navigation team," she said. "You know these hills better than anyone." Ben hesitated. "But I'm not the fastest. What if I slow us down?" She shook her head. "We need your mind, Carter. The rest will follow." That night, under a moonless sky, Ben led the battalion. Through winding ravines and dense forest, avoiding enemy patrols and reaching the extraction point without a single casualty. The men and women who had once doubted him now followed his lead without question at dawn. As helicopters lifted them to safety, Ben looked out over the valley, the place where he had failed, and the place where he had found himself. He realized then that failure wasn't the end. It was the beginning. A month later, the battalion held another round of fitness tests. Ben's heart pounded as he lined up with the others, memories of past failures swirling in his mind. But this time, something was different. He wasn't alone. Davis, Lee, and the others cheered him on, shouting encouragement with every push-up, every lap. Ben still finished near the back, but he finished. And when he crossed the final line, gasping for breath, The squad erupted in applause. Sykes clapped him on the back. "Not bad, Carter. Not bad at all." Ben grinned, sweat streaming down his face. He knew he'd never be the fastest or the strongest, but he was part of the team. He belonged. As the months passed, Ben's story became legend in the battalion. New recruits heard about the kid who'd failed every fitness test but saved the platoon. Officers cited his example in briefings. The chaplain told his story in sermons about perseverance and faith. But for Ben, the real reward was quieter. It was the trust in his squad mates' eyes, the respect in Ramirez's voice, the knowledge that he'd made a difference. He kept his notebook, filling it with new maps, new ideas, new lessons. He mentored others, taught them to see failure not as an ending, but as a beginning. And every night, as he lay in his bunk, he remembered the ravine, the fear, the doubt, the moment he chose to act. He knew he'd never be the strongest, but he'd learned the true meaning of courage. One evening, as the battalion prepared for another deployment, Davis found Ben sitting alone, staring at the stars. "Hey, Carter," Davis said, dropping onto the bench beside him. "You ever think about going for sergeant?" Ben laughed. "Me? I can barely pass the fitness test." Davis grinned. "Doesn't matter. You've got what counts. You've got heart." Ben looked at his friend, at the camp, at the sky above. He thought about everything he'd been through, every failure, every doubt, every moment he'd wanted to quit, and he realized, finally, that he was enough. The seasons shifted in the mountains, and with them, the rhythm of the battalion's life. Patrols came and went, new faces joined the ranks, and old stories were told and retold around campfires. But one story always lingered longer than the rest, the story of Ben Carter, the private who had failed every fitness test, but led the rescue that saved them all. Ben's days were still filled with drills, patrols, and the endless chores of Army life. He still struggled with the rope climb, still finished near the back on the morning runs. But the jeers had faded, replaced by cheers and encouragement. The squad had changed too. Where once there was competition and bravado, there was now a sense of unity, a recognition that every soldier brought something vital to the team. Ben became the quiet center of that unity. He was the one who noticed when someone was struggling, who offered a word of advice or a helping hand. He shared his notebook freely, teaching others the shortcuts he'd mapped, the tricks he'd learned, the strategies that had saved lives. He never forgot what it felt like to be left behind. One chilly morning, as the battalion prepared for a long march, Ben noticed a new recruit, Private Morales, lagging at the back, face red with effort, breaths coming in ragged gasps. The old Ben would have kept his head down, afraid to draw attention. But now, he fell into step beside Morales. "First week?" Ben asked, offering a friendly smile. Morales nodded, embarrassed. "I'm not cut out for this. I can't keep up." Ben shook his head. "Neither could I once, but you keep moving. That's what matters." He shared his story, not as a boast, but as a lifeline. Morales listened, hope flickering in his eyes. By the end of the march, he was still at the back, but he finished. Word spread. Ben's bunk became a gathering place for those who needed advice, encouragement, or just someone to listen. He never turned anyone away. Captain Ramirez saw the change in her platoon. Morale was higher, teamwork stronger. She called Ben into her office one evening, her expression thoughtful. "You've become the glue that holds this squad together, Carter," she said. "I want you to take on more responsibility. Lead the next field exercise." Ben hesitated. "What if I let them down?" Ramirez smiled. "You've already proven you won't." The exercise was grueling, a simulated rescue under fire, with obstacles designed to test every skill. Ben studied the map, planned the route, and assigned roles based on each soldier's strengths. He didn't try to be the fastest or the loudest. He listened, adapted, and encouraged. When the exercise ended, the squad had completed the mission in record time. Ramirez debriefed them with a rare grin. That's what leadership looks like. Not perfection, perseverance. Ben felt a quiet pride. He'd led not by force, but by example. The battalion's annual awards ceremony came around, a rare moment of celebration in the midst of hardship. Soldiers gathered in the mess tent, laughter and music filling the air. When Ben's name was called for the Spirit of the Battalion Award, the applause was thunderous. He stood at the front, medal in hand, cheeks burning. He looked out at his squad, Davis, Lee, Morales, and so many others, and saw not just comrades, but friends. He spoke simply. I used to think I didn't belong here, that I wasn't strong enough. But you all showed me that strength isn't just about muscles. It's about heart, about never leaving anyone behind. The tent erupted in cheers. Even Sykes, the toughest of the tough, wiped a tear from his eye. Ben's father wrote back, his words filled with pride. You've become the man I always hoped you'd be, not because you're the strongest, but because you never gave up. That's the kind of strength the world needs. Ben read the letter over and over, drawing strength from every line dot as time passed. Ben's story became part of the battalion's lore. New recruits heard about the private who'd failed every test but saved the platoon. Officers used his example. In briefings, the chaplain told his story in sermons about faith and perseverance. But for Ben, the real legacy was quieter. It was in the way the squad worked together, the way they looked out for each other, the way no one was left behind. He saw himself in every struggling recruit, every soldier who doubted their worth. He mentored, he encouraged, he led. And in doing so, he found a sense of purpose that no fitness score could ever measure. One night, a storm swept through the mountains, flooding the valley and cutting off a nearby village. The battalion was called to assist with the evacuation. Roads were washed out, bridges gone, and time was running out. Ben was chosen to lead the navigation team again. He studied the maps, plotted a route through the hills, and led his squad. Through mud, rain, and darkness. They reached the village just as the river crested, guiding families to safety, carrying children on their backs, never leaving anyone behind. When they returned to camp, soaked and exhausted, Ramirez called the squad together. You saved lives tonight, she said. Not because you were the strongest, but because you refused to quit. Ben looked around at his team morales, now a confident leader. Lee, fully recovered and always ready with a joke. Davis, his old rival turned friend. He realized that, together, they were stronger than any one of them could ever be alone. Ben's journey was never about being the best on paper. It was about heart, resilience, and the courage to keep going when everything seemed impossible. He had failed, yes, but in failing, he had learned to lead, to inspire, and to never give up on himself or his team. His story became a beacon for anyone who felt like they didn't measure up. For anyone who struggled, who doubted, who thought they weren't enough. Because sometimes the ones who fail the loudest are the ones who save the day. And sometimes the greatest strength is simply refusing to give up.